Okay, people are filtering in. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us here at 10 o'clock. We're going to give just a couple of seconds right before uh, right before we started the webinar. Ted's PowerPoint crashed because, of course, it did. And it's the 4th of April. It's not even April Fool's. Oh, I think it's coming up, Ted. There it is.
All right.
Woo. Okay, we can get started in earnest, although this is about the time that I would get started anyway, and it saved everybody from listening to me talk about something, probably the Mariners. Too long, didn't read Mariners. Blech. Anyway, so you guys have made it to City Light's major HVAC controls upgrade incentive. Uh, New stuff to hear about in the controls world here from City Light. And Ted, from directly from City Light, my colleague, um, will be given the rundown with Elly from AESC, who's helped us out a lot with this. If you click to the next slide, Ted, then I will tell everybody about how GoTo works or is supposed to work. Um, if you haven't taken a webinar with us before, you're all on mute the whole time. But you can ask us questions at any time. There's a little questions icon up in your toolbar that you can click on and send us questions. We'll get those answered throughout the presentation, so send at any time. And the webinar is being recorded, so if you have to step out or if it's so amazing that you need to send this off to your colleagues after we're done, which happens a lot, we'll have that posted on our website within about a week, give or take. And then there's a little survey after class that'll pop up on your browser. And if you take that, we really appreciate it. The chat, I've also put a little, there's a chat icon that's different from the questions bar, which you may find us copying and pasting links and things into that you will be able to access in the chat box. But ask your questions in the questions box. All right, next slide, Ted. And the Lighting Design Lab has a couple other webinars scheduled right now. Um, Two employees of Mitsubishi are going to come talk about what they believe HVAC's role in electrification roadmaps is. It's maybe more targeted towards uh, sales and contractors, but it will be interesting to hear their perspective anyway, regardless. And then a few weeks ago, we had Evan Green from Ecotope come give a presentation on commercial heat pump water heaters, and there were so many questions that we didn't get answered that we asked him to come back for an hour, and he agreed. So if you register for that, you also have an opportunity to add additional questions upon registration. So he'll have those answers on the 30th. And Seattle City Light is going to be at these 3 events there on your screen. So come say hi, ask us questions about the webinar, and anything else. And the next slide is just to let you guys know the polls that we're doing throughout the presentation are going to be on Slido. So you can scan that QR code with your phone right now if you want, or if you don't want to use your phone, you can just go to slido.com. And there's the entry code and the passcode. And I'm going to hand it over to Elly now and get the presentation started for you. I'm going off camera. I'll be in the background pasting in those Slido links and all kinds of stuff. So thank you both. We'll see you towards the end.
Thanks so
Thanks,
much,
Katie.
Katie. Hi, my name is Elly Bunzendahl, and I've been working in Seattle for 18 years and constantly striving to help building owners and operators optimize your performance. Alternative Energy Systems Consulting, or AESC as we are known, is a team of energy experts leading the market on climate solutions for both facilities and for utilities. And we are certainly grateful to partner with Seattle City Light on a few efforts right now. One of which is conducting building management system reviews for large commercial customers. And recently, during one of the BMS reviews, we heard a customer talking about their recent major controls upgrade. And we said, wait, why didn't you utilize a City Light incentive? And they admitted they were unaware that they even existed. And so we buckled down, we created an informational flyer that Katie will be including in the attachments here and will be sent as well after the presentation. And then we helped plan this webinar. We also heard from a different customer. They shared their concern. They weren't totally convinced their efforts to document their project was worth the payout. So we've also tapped into some project details, and hopefully we will demonstrate to you that both the outcomes and the benefits of that process. And I will note, City Light has also worked really hard to streamline their process to hopefully ease that those steps for customers. And so these efforts are one of many initiatives the AESC is involved with to deliver benefits to both end customers and utilities. And Ted, if you click to the next slide, I'll move from sharing why we're here to what we're going to do and what we hope you glean from this webinar. The purpose of this webinar is really to share actual data from a couple projects, review the steps you can take to earn money for your projects, and then share some details about other supplemental incentives you may not know about either. And if you click, Ted, in order to meet these objectives, we're going to keep it lively with polls. So again, we'll give you those instructions if you missed it the first time. We're going to walk through some case study data, describe what that incentive process looks like, and then share our contact information, City Light's contact information. So you are certainly, you'll contact City Light in your next upgrade. And we will use a lot of time at the end to review any unanswered questions. But like Katie mentioned, please use that question icon in the upper right of your window, and we will try to answer them throughout also, but then we'll save some time at the end to make sure we've answered every question. So let's first find out who is joining us today. Ted, if you can click to the first poll, please. Great. Okay, so if you didn't catch it the first time, you can scan this QR code on a smart device. You could go to slido.com, enter 4254329, and then the passcode is BVD2X1. So please select all that apply so that we know who is in the virtual room with us today. Right, so there are some of you that did not know that City Light offered controls upgrade incentives. Well, we are very glad you're here with us today so you can learn about them and call City Light before your next upgrade project. Looks like we have controls contractors on the line. We have some owners. Ooh, some of you are about to start a major upgrade project. Awesome. Okay. Great, thanks so much. That helps give us an idea of who is tuning in today. And Ted, if you don't see too much movement, people answering, you can advance to the next slide, please.
All right.
Okay, great. It's now my pleasure to introduce Ted Brown. And in addition to being very fun to work with, Ted is an Energy Management Analyst Supervisor in Seattle City Light's Customer Energy Solutions Division. Some of you may have interacted with EMAs, and they are the ones responsible for delivering the energy efficiency projects for the utility. Ted has worked for City Light since 2008 in key customer and efficiency program management roles and is a certified energy manager, or CEM, through the Association of Energy Engineers. All right, now to you, Ted. Thanks for kicking us off with case study data.
Thanks, Elly, and good morning. I appreciate everybody's attendance this morning. Looking forward to working with you. We're going to start with our dessert first piece is what I call this. This is kind of the quick overview of giving you the quick um, look at how these projects come together and how the incentives work and what the benefits are. This is an approach that if you're familiar with PSC's major controls program, we've kind of informally adopted over the last 18 months or so. We've done probably 10 projects uh, utilizing this approach. It is much more streamlined than what we've had in the past, much easier to implement, and we'd like to really promote it to make sure that folks are able to take advantage of it. So two quick overviews of projects we've incentivized using this methodology. The first one is about a 70,000 square foot building, and it's about 100 years old, so not a new building. The existing controls, were outdated, needed to be updated. They didn't really provide a lot of opportunity to operate the building in an efficient manner. So they put in new controllers for their variable air volume HVAC system, zone sensors for better zone control in the building, better discharge air sensors, et cetera. So it was a pretty comprehensive upgrade of their control system for replacement. Total project cost was about $122,000. Incentives ended up being around $40,000 of that. So we made a base incentive payment. So after the project was completed and commissioned and the controls were operating, we paid the first half of what we considered to be or estimated the energy savings and incentive of $20,000. Monitored savings after another 12 months. And this project kind of came in right at about where we'd estimated for savings. And so the second incentive came out to about $20,000. So total savings or total incentive of $40,000 for the project, and energy savings were around 170,000 kilowatt hours, and that was about 13% of their annual energy consumption. Next project, a little bit newer building. And, all right, sorry, my slide is not going. There we go. So a little bit newer building, larger, 100,000 square feet. A building that has some mixed use, some retail offices, as well as some residential applications. The building was only 15 years old, but didn't have a very good comprehensive control system. It had some sort of disparate HVAC systems that weren't really connected and controlled by a central system. So they enabled alarms, did more scheduling and setbacks, utilized some trending to help put together some reset strategies, and again, more setbacks and better monitoring. Total project cost there was $119,000. The incentive ended up being $36,000 for that project. It was initially estimated at around $22,000, and that's one of the the really nice things about this particular approach is that if your project overperforms the estimated savings or incentive, you'll actually get more money than what we initially estimate. So the base incentive was paid $11,000 to that customer after the project was completed, and then we tracked the savings for the year, and they received $25,000 at the final performance payment. Estimated energy savings for that project, actually verified energy savings, were 160,000 kilowatt hours, and they ended up saving around $12,000 per year. So again, this is a project that overperformed, and we originally estimated that the incentive would be around $22,000, but the final payout based on performance was $36,000. So how does this all work? Okay, I'm sorry, I forgot about this slide. So it's a really quick overview of how this works. Are you more interested in this approach or not? We'll give you a second to. So on the whole, yes, it's a good approach. It's one that we've recognized for a while that hey, we should really try and formalize this and promote it more. And we just are finally having time and staff to make this happen. So for future case studies, what might you want to learn about? And then I'm going to jump into some more details of how this actually works, sort of the benefits, payments, eligibility criteria, etc. More about specific measures that achieve the savings. Okay, we can talk about that in general as we go through some of the strategies that were implemented and some of those details around eligibility and what we're asking customers to do for this. Okay. Front end, back end. Specifics about the controls, any preferences. Okay, pay for performance. All right, I see one
This is great.
question.
This is helpful, especially for other case studies too. So thanks for all these responses.
Yes. One question I'll kind of jump into as we go is, so the metering is accomplished looking at the building metering from City Light. And I will jump in. So it's looking at whole building monitoring, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So the overview, so now that we've had sort of the quick, what can you get out of this program and how can it really perform and support your project work? Quick little look at the benefits, eligibility, what are the requirements to participate, what makes you eligible for this, and when would this be a good approach for your project, a little bit more about the payments and how the funding is based, the process, and then the people involved to make it happen. So on the benefits, implementing the controls upgrades, typically it improves your comfort and performance. It gives you better control over what's going on in your building, more granular control, typically in different zones and different areas of the building, and provides better ability for you as the operator and owner to see what's going on and to better manage that and optimize your building use, especially now where, many buildings aren't in full occupancy all the time as we're, in hybrid environments. It gives you better control to dial back and modulate operations to meet the number of people in the building at any one given time. The City Light incentives, in this controls approach, it gives you a guaranteed base incentive payment after your installation and verification. So you have some certainty of at least a minimum amount of savings and incentive that you'll receive from the utility. And the performance incentive, it gives you more incentive to actually optimize the controls and really reduce your energy consumption for the building, because the more you save, the more funding you're going to be able to get. And so that helps you as a vendor and an owner operator. It gives you incentive to really optimize the operations of your buildings and really enhance your performance. So what makes you eligible for this approach? This is typically for buildings, you've got to be a City Light electricity customer. As I mentioned, Puget Sound Energy has been utilizing this approach for buildings in their service area for quite a while. So if you're a city or a PSE customer, you would be eligible under their program. For us, if you're one of our electricity customers, you have to have at least 50,000 square feet of conditioned space in the building. You have to have annual electricity consumption that correlates to outside air temperature. This kind of gets back to one of those earlier questions about metering. We utilize whole building regression analysis to track the energy savings from this approach. And this is where different in the past, where it's been sort of cumbersome, where often we've tried to make calculations or estimate specific energy savings from specific measures, which takes a lot of time, a lot of resources, and drives up the cost of a project and the amount of time it takes to complete it. But for a building that shows really solid correlation with outside air temperature, we can use whole building analysis to track the savings of the project. So you complete a major HVAC controls upgrade that includes, new control equipment with a web-based, and not necessarily web-based, but a graphical user interface that can be viewed by the owners and operators of the building at the site. We know many customers are actually stepping back from web-based interfaces due to security concerns, but it should be a graphical user interface. And the other thing that's really important is you have to be looking to implement at least 3 major energy efficiency HVAC control sequences. So we'll show that at the right, but you're going beyond just a control system that you can schedule the building and just provides basic, let's heat it to 72 in the winter, and in the summer we'll cool it to 74. You have to have sequences that are going to provide you better flexibility around scheduling, looking at resets for supply air and return air, lockouts. Those are some of the more the better types of sequences to be able to implement that gives you, again, the better ability to modulate the operations of your building and match what the systems are doing to the people that are in the building and when people are in the building and when they're not in the building. Payments. So how do you get paid for this? Always important. So we offer incentives that cover up to 70% of the installed costs of a project. Typically, we see that controls upgrades, it's a fairly expensive proposition, has great payback and great impacts on the building. We usually see that our incentive will cover 25 to 35% of the cost of the project. That's kind of been the sweet spot we've noticed, or at least the spot that we notice where our incentive can implement or can help you out. So payment one is the base incentive, and that's where we guarantee that you're going to get at least a minimum amount of savings if your building is deemed eligible for this approach. So once your project is installed, it's commissioned, it's up and running, we'll issue a payment of 50% of the contracted incentive amount upon receiving, the submittals and verification of the installed measures. That's typically your commissioning reports, and we'll also do a site visit to make sure that it's up and running and look at your system. And payment two is the performance incentive, and this is where we're monitoring the energy consumption of the building using that whole building regression analysis. So the remaining payment issued upon completion of the performance period, which is about 12 months, and as long as savings are greater than 5%. And this is where, we're typically estimating 10% of savings from the building, and that first initial payment is basically saying that we're claiming 5% savings for your building when we make that additional payment. So in order for you to receive the second performance payment, it's got to be above 5%. All right. And here's sort of there's a graphical walkthrough of how the process comes together. So you come to us with your application. So you provide a proposed scope of work. And again, it's really important to get us involved early in the process when you're still putting your scope of work together, before you've ordered equipment, before you're mobilizing to do your project. We need to offer up a performance or a participation agreement to the customer before the project starts. So give us a proposed scope of work for upgrades. We'll review the proposal, look at the energy consumption for the building. That's something we can do relatively quickly, and we can pull data, at least on the monthly basis, pretty quickly. For some buildings, we may need to look at the hourly or the 15-minute data for the building to put together a regression model that shows what the savings that you're tracking along with weather, and that we don't need to look at anything around occupancy or any other changes you've made to building operations. Generally, we've seen that buildings are pretty stable. Even though we've kind of gone through COVID, we've settled into sort of our new normal, and buildings are operating pretty consistently and fairly stably, especially most commercial buildings, just at a lower level than what they were doing before COVID. So once the participation agreement goes to the customer, then you go ahead and you install your project, commission your controls, look at your sequencing, and then provide that documentation to City Light once you're completed. We do an on-site verification, just looking at looking through screenshots of the different systems and your control sequences, and then we make that first payment. And then we verify performance, 12 months later. You keep your building up and running, make any tweaks you need to sequences to try and optimize your operations. and then we do a closeout payment at the very end. And that, so people, how do you get involved with this? The next best step, getting a hold of our energy advisors. They're waiting and ready to talk with you. They'll get ahead and get the basic details of your project, pass it along to one of our EMAs. So we've got a team of 13 people that are working on these kinds of projects, and we're ready to get going. So we've just covered the controls, incentive, benefits. So we have another little Slido poll. Before we tell you about a few other incentives that are related to controls, so not the HVAC major controls, but if you're doing sequences or you've got rooftop units that could use some upgrades, what do you need to know about the incentive before your next project? And I will, in the meantime, look at what other questions we've got coming through. Do they have to be new sequences? Generally, new sequences, yes. If they're sequences you've tried to implement that aren't working, we'll certainly look at those. And again, we're going to evaluate the project. But generally, new sequences are sequences that aren't currently operating. If your controls contractor has evidence that, hey, we've been trying to do this, but because we don't have this controller or this portion of the system, then we would maybe look at a different piece. Can projects completed retroactively get an incentive? Unfortunately, they cannot. We do need to show that the incentive actually influenced your decision to move forward with a project to provide an incentive. It doesn't work with the retro commissioning incentive. However, if you deploy, especially for monitoring-based commissioning or analytics, after you do a controls upgrade, that will increase your performance incentive. So it doesn't work with the retro commissioning incentive, but doing retro commissioning or doing monitoring-based commissioning after installation of a controls upgrade is a good strategy to increase that performance incentive. No, we don't have a list of vendor providers. Sorry, the city of Seattle has a very hard time recommending specific contractors. So we typically don't, for any of our programs, have a list of pre-approved vendors or providers. We evaluate the project based on what's going on at the customer site. These projects. Service upgrades are something that really has to be evaluated by the electric service engineer or electric service representative from City Light on a case-by-case basis. Suggested. Requirements about, sorry. I think the main thing on the existing controls are that they're not able to provide more than just basic comfort and scheduling, on, off, etc. No, we don't require electric heat, but we are going to be looking to see, if a building doesn't have electric heat, it's going to have much less energy consumption from electricity. But you'll still have some savings that kind of is that in roughly 10% piece. Other than scope, price, what else do you need for us to maximize incentives? To maximize incentives, it's savings. It's what can you generate in terms of sequences that produce the most savings. We do have an additional incentive I'm going to cover in just a second that adds probably about 10%. It's our project development incentives, so we do have some additional ways to maximize incentives. But for this project, it's performance based, so the more electricity you save, the higher the incentive. All right. One last question. The performance period is typically 12 months. It may be 8 to 9 months, depending on what we call the coverage factor. So we're using statistical analysis to create the savings. You have to have enough conditions over the course of the typical meteorological year to justify savings. So it may be a little less than a year, but it's typically 12 months. All right, I'm going to move on to the last few incentives we have to cover, and then we can get back to some more Q&A at the very end. So a couple other incentives that are related to HVAC and controls. So we have, for buildings that just have or may have, a combination of large HVAC or major HVAC control systems, you may still have smaller rooftops or package units in the building. There's an advanced rooftop control incentive. This is a rebate that's based on the size of the unit in tons, anywhere from $120 to $500 per ton for those units, and that's typically installing a controller that adds variable speed drive, so it adds some variable speed to the fan, so as well as economizer controls for the full arc incentive. We do have in thermostats for rebates for connected thermostats. One thing that I think is important to note here is we do have a special rebate for connected thermostats or web-enabled thermostats in hotels. So the connected thermostat is more for it's something in a retail store, a real simple commercial application. But if you are working with a hotel or somebody in the hospitality industry, we do have specific rebates that are targeted to web-enabled thermostats for hotels and hospitality, but those are based on more of a custom calculation or a little bit different rebate. But for a retail or a small commercial application, we do have a rebate for $150 up to $50 for a bonus for installing connected thermostat. Custom incentives. So not everything is going to qualify for this major HVAC performance-based system. So things that, if you've got individual building systems components, you're just looking at controls optimization for your chiller system or for your air handlers, we do have custom incentives we can put together pretty quickly for many of those. For variable speed drives on VAV air handlers, we actually have a fixed $300 per horsepower incentive that's available. Other applications, data centers, et cetera, those we still have that custom incentive pathway. We also, if you're just optimizing sequences for controls, we have what's called an operations and maintenance incentive. So that's 10 cents per kilowatt hour. Again, that's something we actually have to calculate out the savings for. But if you don't really need an HVAC controls upgrade, but you see opportunities to increase your efficiency or change sequences, then we can provide that incentive, the 10 cents per kilowatt hour.
Ted, can I interrupt real quick?
Sure.
There was a question, Allison wanted to know if buildings under the 50,000 square feet that we were talking about in the first incentives, if those qualify for these incentives that you're talking about now.
Typically not. We'd certainly evaluate it if there is an HVAC, control system that controls the entire building. It may qualify. It just depends on the amount of energy consumption. Oftentimes for smaller buildings like that, you don't have a major building automation system or computer-based control system. It may be just something that's typically for rooftop units, but we can certainly evaluate whether or not it's something that will qualify or not. Certainly reach out and we can let you know if this approach would work or if there's a different approach that could provide incentives and be fairly streamlined. So back to the equipment incentives again, we can look at basic incentives around energy efficiency equipment, customize for like replacements. If you've got a 50-ton rooftop unit that you're replacing with another 50-ton rooftop unit, or a chiller that you're replacing, 500-ton chiller with another 500-ton chiller, incentives are actually provided through the HVAC distributors directly to the customer, or actually directly to the distributor. As a customer, you need to make sure that they're passing that incentive along to you. But for those units where typically energy code is the baseline for what any sort of incentive we would offer, that's through our distributors. So you don't actually need to get involved with City Light for any of those incentives. And same for some of our lighting fixtures for small lighting upgrades, or if you're going from T8 fluorescent to T-LEDs, the Lighting to Go program is a distributor direct incentive that goes right to the customer. And then last on our incentive list, one thing again, relating back to administrative and the work of dealing with the utility, is what we call, we have two supplemental incentives. One is direct to customers on every project we do. It's currently 2.5 cents per kilowatt hour. It's called the Project Development Incentive, and that's meant to cover the administrative costs of working with the utility. And so that adds roughly 10% onto the cost, or to the cost of the incentive of the project. The other incentive we have is the Energy Project Manager, and that's for customers that are working with larger in facilities where you have multiple projects that you'll be pursuing over time. And you can designate someone to be an energy manager, and there's an additional 2.5 cents a kilowatt hour for projects that are completed under that framework with your energy manager, where you've got HVAC projects, maybe some lighting. There's an additional incentive that's available through that piece. And then the last slide on our incentives, some of the other technical assistance that we can provide to you. As Elly alluded to, we've got the BMS review. We're working with AESC, and so if you don't have a partner who's working with you to help optimize your HVAC system, we can provide that service, and somebody can kind of evaluate potential for energy savings with your systems. Our EMAs are available to help analyze your energy use and identify opportunities to improve your building performance. And then we've got technical assistance we can provide to you and your team in terms of helping to monitor, doing logging of systems, et cetera. If you want to do a little more of a deeper dive into how your energy is being used in your facility, we can certainly help and support those efforts. And that is the end of our official slides. We'll go back to Q&A. Trying to see if we've got any other questions that have come up.
Not in the questions tab, but we have a couple in the Slido. Do you want to address those now? I think you've got another poll
Sure.
to have people put
Yeah,
questions
let's see
into.
here. Yeah. So what other questions do we have for? Will this presentation be recorded? It is being recorded. During review and analysis stage, SCL provide their own suggestions for controls, upgrades, which can provide better incentive payouts. We can certainly provide some additional look. This is an area where we may have our BMS review done to help you decide what sequences may be best suited for your building and the equipment you've got in your facility.
There was a question in the Q&A on Slido that said the slides mentioned the incentive. I apologize for the background noise. The slides mentioned the incentive is focused on office retail buildings. What about other building types such as industrial manufacturing?
Those are typically going to be more of a custom calculated incentive. You know, we've seen this approach used with some healthcare facilities, but it has been primarily commercial office buildings that have participated in this approach. You know, we're looking for facilities that have really stable consumption that's tracked to weather. For industrial facilities, you know, we can certainly utilize this approach, but it may we may also need to track your production if your energy consumption is really related to the amount of production or widgets you're producing in your process. If owner doesn't have sequence of operations, we could certainly help develop that. It would depend a little bit um, on your facility's control system, and we may. It would depend. I guess reach out to us with the project. We can't. We can help you come up with some general sequences of operations that you might want to implement, but we can't really recommend a specific partner to do that for you for your system. AESC may be able to do the BMS review and provide some guidance on what kind of sequences would best be suited to your facility, but we may not be able to work with your specific control system.
And I had one more in the Slido Q&A, a very specific one. Does 22,000 square feet of pneumatic VAVs to DDC VAV with variable fan and heat qualify for this? It's equipment replacement upgrade.
It would qualify for incentives. I wouldn't want to say right away that absolutely it will qualify for this approach. Again, it's we'd look at the scope of work and at the energy consumption, and if what you're proposing will the juice is worth the squeeze, so to speak, for this effort, we may be able to do a custom calculation on that. But certainly reach out to us with the scope of work, and we can take a look at it, and I think relatively quickly determine whether or not that's going to qualify or not for this approach. But it will certainly qualify for some incentives. HVAC incentives for smaller buildings. Yes, so there are, if you're just replacing equipment, then there are incentives that are generally directed through the distributor channel to you. We may have to do a custom calculation on HVAC for a smaller building if it doesn't have a full control system. Again, we've got, our team has been working on projects for 30, 40 years. We can make custom calculations relatively quickly. And even in a smaller building, you may still come up with the conclusion that, hey, we're going to see a 10 or 15% reduction, and this is what we think the incentive should be. And again, I don't think I mentioned that we base our incentive on 23 cents per kilowatt hour of incentive for savings. So if you've got a building that's using 1 million kilowatt hours and you save 10%, then the savings would be 100,000 kilowatt hours. Incentive would be roughly $23,000.
Okay, and then I think maybe when we were talking about building types, Michael, somebody just answered. Oh no, we were looking for clarification. Michael asked, what about HOAs?
An HOA would be eligible as long as it's a centralized control system. So it would be for a larger condo association. We've certainly worked with on lighting and other projects with some of the larger high-rise condos, but you've got to have you would have to have an HVAC system that was centrally controlled for the entire building and not thermostats for each individual unit. Or there may be thermostats in each individual condo or home, but you still have a central HVAC system that's providing the ventilation and heating and cooling for the entire facility.
And I think there's one more poll question after this.
I don't see anything else in my poll questions. HVAC incentives for smaller buildings. I believe we've got that. If we don't have a sequence of operations.
Oh no, I'm sorry. I mean one more for attendees to answer.
Okay.
Another
Oh,
slide
sorry.
with a. I think there is.
Thank you.
I don't have the deck up.
Yes, sorry. I need more practice at running these webinars. What other topics would you like to hear about? And I know that one of the questions is, what is the best email to send questions to? And that we've got a slide for that in just a moment, but it's for our energy advisors, which I will have up here in just a moment. And I think Katie will probably clear up it at the last, but and we will have more about the slide deck is, and it will be mailed out to everyone after this presentation, along with the contact info for our energy advisors. We'd like to hear about lighting controls incentives. If we've got anything queued up for that in the future. We do have on the City Light Customer Energy Solutions website, we do have details on lighting controls. I don't know if we've covered specifically incentives, but I know Lighting Design Lab has some presentations in their library around the use of luminaire level lighting controls. We still offer an incentive for those. We actually increased our incentives for lighting, and there's a fixture bonus of $75 per fixture for installation of fixtures that have a Design Lights Consortium or DLC qualified control system that is controlling them. Pay for performance. All right. Gonna let this go.
And there's a great lighting controls toolkit too on your website.
Right. All right, let's take it to almost the wrap up. I see one other question that's come up in the chat there. Let me see if I can get to that. All right. So again, please help spread the word. Giving you kind of a nice overview of how we've been doing this, and again, we've utilized this approach in about a dozen projects so far. We wanted to spread the word because it is relatively straightforward compared to many of the other incentives we've offered, especially around HVAC controls. This flyer is up on our website. We're happy to talk with you on an individual basis. I know we can't globally often say, yeah, you're absolutely going to apply for, qualify for this approach. But we do, we do have targets to hit in terms of reaching energy efficiency, and we do want to work with customers to make projects work. And so we'll do whatever we can to make it work and make it as easy as possible to participate in our programs. And then for the last questions here about following up. So here's the email address. It's sclenergyadvisor@seattle.gov. This is how you can get in touch with us about an individual project you're considering. Contact our energy advisors. We'll get it assigned very quickly to an energy management analyst who can go over the particulars of your building, pull your consumption, and make sure that puts you on the best path forward and the simplest path forward to take advantage of our incentives.
Yep, that is it. And there's all these links are active when you get the presentation afterwards. And Elly and I pasted a few links to some documents in the chat, including the flyer that you just saw a little screenshot of. And after I close out this webinar, a very short, simple survey comes up, and we would really appreciate if you take that. Thank you, Ted. Thank you, Elly, for this presentation today. I think we got a lot of people's questions covered.
Great.
But
Thanks so much.
yeah, and if anybody has questions, shoot it to sclenergyadvisor@seattle.gov. Ted works like, I don't know, 5 desks away. They're not far from getting answers to you.
Yeah, thanks for everyone's time this morning, and we look forward to having you participate in our program.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a great day. Bye.
I'm trying to end it and it won't end.